Seer Show is a live broadcast of truth seekers and believers, empowering the evolution of consciousness. Rafael and Celeste will dive deeper than the mainstream media while answering the mind's deeper questions and transforming conversations. They will have unique guest speakers who will share knowledge, tools, and techniques to create coherence in our mind, body, and spirit.
Good morning. Good morning. How
Good
are
morning.
you?
I'm good, thank you very much. And it is 7:30 p.m., Rafael, because it's something here in, when the world turns, I believe we just go around the sun. So how come we've got different times? Do you know what I am? Otherwise, I would have tried to get you out of bed at 3:30 in the morning.
Look at that. So you said the world revolves. Isn't the world flat?
No, that's a whole nother program for another time. I love astrology, so I'm saying it's round.
Is it?
But I am very open always to hear other beliefs. There was a part in my life where I did look into it, but I sailed. Don't forget, Rafael. I'm a very passionate sailor, so you sail around. Trust me.
Ah, look at that. So when we think worldwide, right? And we talked about the world being round, and I do believe it because now we have images from outer space looking back at us, right? And we don't fall off, do we?
No, we
But you know how
gravitate. It's
fast we're going?
a good.
Do you know how fast we're going?
No, tell me.
I think
Tell
it's
us.
800 miles an hour a minute or some crazy I don't listen, whoever's out there, come and tell us exactly how fast the world is spinning every minute because
Yeah.
it is a phenomenal number and we're still look, I'm in my seat. I'm chilling.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
holding on. Look, I'm not
Our
holding on.
chakras
See?
are right. We're calm. It's good. And sometimes that we have to remind ourselves of that no matter how rough or chaotic it might seem, if it's
Right.
in our mind, don't forget we are meant to be here. We're meant to gravitate. Okay. The heart will keep on beating. Just take a good deep breath and let the world keep spinning around you.
We have to think about our lives. What are our lives full of, right? Full of opportunities, full of choices. And today we're going to talk about a choice that many people make. And sometimes it's a small choice that can make things good or bad for our lives. And we're
Mm.
definitely going to be talking about addiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Scary.
It's a hard one because when you
Mm,
say the word drugs, that in itself means so many different things to so many people,
I
right?
love that image.
It's very cool. It's not ours, by the way.
Yeah,
So
it's so cool. Thank you.
you we might be receiving a few emails. I think the design is perfect because it's got that shocking image of an injection, which
Mm,
no matter what culture you come from or what age you're like, oh, you instantly think of the worst drugs. But look inside, it's food, it's music, it's passion, the gaming industry.
mm,
So when we talk about addiction, I think we should really clarify that being addicted to a substance or to a behavior. So we've got those two.
right.
But then also, is it a positive addiction? Is it a negative addiction? Where
Mm,
did it start? And that's why I love the image because I want everyone to realize that maybe you think you have an addiction to something and you can't get rid of it and there are options to replace it, but going backwards into what starts addiction, Raphael,
mm,
we often look at people and go, oh, they're a heroin addict or drug addict, and how did it get so far?
right.
And I find it very sad, Raphael, that sometimes we underestimate the trauma, what triggered them to still make those decisions as an adult.
Right.
And so there's triggers from, is it from childhood that they then as an adult were not able to cope? Or is it an addiction that maybe came from a person who was very healthy, very functioning, but had a car accident and had to be on severe drugs for 6 months, also dealt with the psychological trauma, let's say maybe someone died, that can also be a tremendous impact on someone's life, and they become addicted, let's say
Right.
drug addiction, pharmaceutical. So I think the first thing I really want to say from my heart chakra today about this subject on this broadcast is never judge someone,
No.
because
Okay.
listen to their story first, where it all started.
You know, one of the things that addictions can happen at any time, right? Like I talked about opportunities and choices. We have the opportunity to become addicted every single day. You know, every day that I know that this show is going to come on, I think I'm getting addicted to our show.
Yeah, so is the whole world.
But you know, there is addictions. There's addictions to food. There's addictions to not eating too. You know, people who become anorexic. So there's different addictions, different views of what we think is okay, right? And the image that you had before, I saw a little pizza slice, right? People can be addicted. I had a client one time who said to me, and she wanted to lose weight so badly, but she could not give her pizza addiction up. She goes,
Oof.
I must eat pizza every single day. And I'm like, can we?
Vegan and gluten-free? Is that another option? Does that count? Sorry. I
Maybe.
was trying to get away with it.
But you know what? It's, you know, it wasn't even the fact if it's vegan or gluten free, it's the dough part, right? It's the white flour, which is harmful to us. So, can we be addicted to something that's going to be, can we be addicted to eating an apple every day? How about celery? How about carrots? You know, and then the thing is, what do these things do to our bodies? Whether it's a drug, a food, even a hobby, right? People over exercise because they've become addicted. And look, I work out every day after our broadcast. This morning for me, I know it'll be evening for you. I'm going to go work out. Why? I have a passion for it. Some people don't understand it and they think I'm addicted. But for me, it's not overdoing it. It's a matter of what do I want to accomplish. So I have a goal in mind and I have a conscious goal in mind, but
Conscious
somehow it's become part of my subconscious as well because I'm not thinking about it 24/7, but it is there. It is apparent. And the reason I work out every day is because I want to be able to move this gift, this body. This body's a gift. Your body's a gift. Everybody's body is
Everybody
a
is a gift.
gift.
Everyone is a gift.
Everyone is a gift. So addiction could be looked at in so many different ways. Why don't we start with the small ones and then we can build into the big, the drugs and alcohol, all these things. So let's start even talking about what happens when we are children. And sometimes people, okay, parents, caretakers, they facilitate an addiction because maybe they are addicted. And it could be the simple things like, how do we even train a dog? When you train a pet, in order to, you ever see these dogs that are so extremely obedient, even show dogs? You ever see a show dog? They're on cue, they're on camera, they know exactly what to do. Why? Because they've been trained. And it's all because there's going to be a treat at the end of it.
Yeah,
So
conditions.
if you do this, you get that.
Mm.
So it starts leading to the mind part of the addiction, where
Which is actually the prefrontal
of
cortex.
course.
That's where actually the reward circuit, they call it. It's
Mhm.
actually called the reward circuit. It actually will train your brain to go, but I deserve a treat. Let me. Oh, hello, Mr. Ray. Just came on.
Yeah,
Hello.
I see that.
Hi. Can you jump on? Can you jump on?
I'm gonna send him the link, make sure he's got it. So RJ, I'm gonna send you the link so you can jump on with us, my friend.
And I
So
can talk about the prefrontal cortex.
no, go for it. We love that.
Okay, change the channel. She's talking about her neurotransmitters again. But you know that part of the neuroplasticity, that is really that reward circuit, and that's when it becomes so dangerous. And there's two things I wanted to mention. There's two different addictions as well. And this is really important to find out for those who want to find out about themselves and about their own addiction or get someone else to help them. There's one where it enhances you. So if you're a person that's adrenaline, dopamine, endorphins, glutamate. One second. Hello. Well, good evening from Australia.
Hello, how are you?
He is your neighbor, you know.
Oh, where are you?
I've actually been on the show for a while. I was kind of hanging out there.
Oh, you just didn't come in.
I don't I don't think I had the StreamYard link. So
Yeah, I had sent you an email, but that's okay. You're on now.
I am.
We are
Love
live,
it.
Mr.
How are you?
You asked me how I am? Well, I'm going to tell you, I am exceptional and getting better every day. Just thought I'd share that with you. RJ, thank you so much for joining us. As you know, we are talking about a subject that you know quite well, and it's addiction, right? And we started, and I figured that we can start talking about the aspects of how we become addicts even from a young age, right? And who facilitates that for us. And Celeste was also talking about the different traumas that may cause us to become addicted to something, someone even, because some people are addicted to people.
So the
Yeah.
difference is in terms of behavior and
Mm,
also substance. So that clarification that there's two different types of addiction as well.
yeah.
Yeah, what I tend to find is when a person gets sober from drugs or alcohol, their addiction will continue to play out in a much more subtle way. So you'll
Mm,
start to see sex addiction, love addiction. You'll start to see addiction playing out in a much deeper way, whereas drugs and alcohol typically are a obvious manifestation of that addiction. Whereas once they put the bottle down or the drug down, you just have to wait and you'll start to really see how the addiction shifts and reshapes itself, and it will find a way to play out in individuals' lives. Because per the point that Celeste and you made, Rafael, was that, you know, the addiction and how it manifests itself is simply an outcome,
mhm,
right? How I choose to act out will change and evolve. And
right.
that's the journey of sobriety. And ultimately, that's where it is a gift, because if you stay on the journey long enough, you start to optimize.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. You know, one of the things, and I know you're very much an expert on, and there you go. There's that awesome picture that you have, the ultra habits. But when we think about addiction, it's not just drug and alcohol. It could be, and we've talked about it, it could be food. It could be the lack of eating food. That's an addiction. It could be so many different things. An addiction could be a good thing for some people, and it could be a definitely negative, impactful. Addiction is impactful no matter how you look at it. So we want to definitely dive deeper into what goes through someone when they become addicted. And it doesn't matter what the addiction is. And you're right, RJ, because addiction, like a habit, can change. We have to replace one with the other. So for somebody who is addicted to food, they have to change that to maybe working out, so that that different feeling gives them the feeling of, because I'm working out, I'm not going to eat as much, or I'm going to make better choices. So there is a healthy alternative to our addictions and how we handle everything that happens in our lives. It's basically handling it, right? Because listen, there are people out there who were addicted, say, to drugs or even alcohol, but prior to becoming fully addicted, they might have just, maybe they had a glass of wine once in a while. And Celeste was talking about an occurrence in their life, a moment in time that something happened, a trauma, an occurrence. They lost a loved one, a loss, even a gain, right? Because maybe people gain too much money, too much fame, and all of a sudden they gain new friends who are going to influence them in a negative way. So those are the different things of how we become addicted. And I think that's something that we have to touch upon.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Rafael, and I have, and partly because of how I got sober in the forum that I got sober in, for me, and when I help people get sober, I don't necessarily dive into the why. I
Mm,
focus on the how. And there are times where deep therapy and regression, I feel, are required.
mhm,
However, for an addict or alcoholic that is in the midst of chaos and suffering, the way I learned to get sober, and that was through 12 steps, was we needed to act ourselves through a process of
right.
transformation. And through that process of transformation, the mind and the heart conformed. And so it gets very complex to do psychological um, analysis and deep diving into one's trauma when you're in the existential crisis of, I'm going to die if
Mm,
I don't get sober. The why becomes more relevant as time goes on and we want to optimize the way we're living. So we might find at 3 years sober, we're incapable of relationships. Why? What happened?
mm,
Right? And that's then the journey of unpacking. I still have a personal view, and it's a view that is worth debating. That for me, um, using my using Western psychology to try to go in and understand the mechanisms of why RJ became addicted never worked for me.
mhm,
It never worked. It was a psychological process that took me deeper into the problem. And that's not wholesale. Again, I believe there are scenarios where there's deep trauma. People have been raped, molested.
mhm.
But I think that there has to be wisdom in the approach,
Right,
if
right.
that makes sense.
Without a doubt, and when we think about the trauma, when we think about even location, right? And before Celeste and I were talking about the world and how it's round and it's big, but yet so small, right? Because when you were on my show, we talked about how you had to leave the States in order, right, to reclaim yourself. But even when you left the States, you found that atmosphere again. You looked for the places, the actions, the behavior that you were trying to get away from, but you still found it. So it doesn't matter where you go in the world, you're still there. You're still going to show up, and your addiction doesn't go away because you changed locations. Your addiction is going to be there. It's the work that you do, the work that you did, RJ. And I commend you for doing what you do. But here's the other thing that I love about you. You didn't just do it and then, you know, run around and be happy. You realize that there's a problem. And you talked about it earlier, how you help other people overcome that addiction that they have. And no matter what it is, and you talked about sex and all these different things, because you said, you're right, one addiction can lead to another. But is it positive or is it negative? And sometimes a lot of times, right? Sex, rock and roll. There you go. Right? Those are addictions right there.
Yeah, and we were talking about Hunter S. Thompson the other week, actually, about all those crazy lifestyles
Right.
that maybe enhance the creativity, but everything that comes up must come down the whole time as well. So you'll find that a lot in obviously very creative people. They use the adrenaline, dopamine, endorphins to sort of, enhance their feeling through drugs or a substance or an addiction to something. And then there's, I feel like, almost the opposite addiction, where it's more about the serotonin and the GABA, which is two different directions of neurotransmitters almost. So you've got addiction to sedate and dream and lift and ease your problem, and then you have almost the enhancing, I need the adrenaline and I need the dopamine. So
That's right.
two different kinds of people in a way as well that I really wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's very true, Celeste. I agree with you totally.
I think it's the first step to sort of find out. And I really, really appreciate the way you mentioned that it's not so much why, it's how. And I found that so wonderful to hear, because often, as you said, we spend hours and hours on expensive psychiatrists, and they keep on digging and drawing you back to the car accident, back to the childhood abuse, back to the incident. But it's how are we moving on from now? Because trauma is never what happened, it's how we reacted to it. And that's why just before you jumped on, RJ, I was saying, it's so important for me on this show to mention, never judge someone who has an addiction, because they might have been the most intelligent, performance, everything person, but they had a car accident or had to overcome cancer and then became an addict to something. So it's not just the ones who were neglected in childhood, and things like that. This world has a lot of suffering, and not everyone is able to deal with it every day. So I wanted to just say, never judge someone, because there can be some very sort of heartbreaking stories behind how they got into that place.
Yeah, it's totally true. So like have a lot of experience in the addiction community, and I've come across addicts that have no doubt trauma, or they've been raised in environments where there wasn't sufficient attachment. And one of my good mates here was raised by parents that were like Tony Robbins, very aware, both mother and father. The father was in recovery for a very long time. The kids were raised with virtues, values, motivation, inspiration, everything you could imagine and want. Both sons turned out to be alcoholics. One could say it might be genetic, right? So again, I think we can do mental gymnastics around the how or the why, but ultimately we need a process that moves us, reshapes and reorientates our values, our ways of operating. We need a system, and through that process, we then can go deeper. We can sit with ourselves longer. I mean, most addicts I know can't even sit with themselves. You get an addict or an alcoholic to meditate, it can actually backfire because it could be counterproductive. And so at some point in our recovery we need to learn to sit still and be with ourselves. And that's a whole nother process,
Right.
because, whoa, then you really come to realize why you were drinking and using, with a narrative that is literally shouting at you all the time, abusing you all the time, right? So it's an interesting process. Sobriety is much more interesting than using, that's for sure.
Yeah. When we think about all the steps, and you talked about, you did the 12 steps, how important is it to truly go through every single step? I've never been through it. So, and not only have you been through it, but you also assist people, right? What made you, even before we go through the steps, what made you come out on the other side? Because you could have been there. And we talked about, you could not even be here today because you made a decision. What was it that made you make that decision?
There was a moment in time where I hit a critical emotional rock bottom, and I remember that moment in time. And that moment in time was not any more profound than I hadn't been through a negative experience at that moment that was any worse than one that would have been through previously. But there was a moment in time where my shoulders dropped. I looked up in the sky and I looked down at the ground, and my shoulders dropped, and I knew I was done. I knew that there was either two choices. One was survive or die. And I think a survival instinct kicked in. But at that moment, they talk about moments like these Moses burning bush moments.
Yes.
I haven't had many, but there was an interesting phenomena that occurred in that moment, which I hear other addicts talk about. At that moment, the obsession to drink and use was immediately lifted. It was like my ego cracked.
Wow.
And there was a psychological shift, like there was a reorientation immediately. I knew that it was going to be hard, but I knew I would never drink or use again. I literally was done. That was it.
Wow.
And from there, I then needed a process. And because, I grew up in the US, we all go to 12 steps when we're like 15, right? Like that's where the courts send us, right? Like, so I knew where to go. And that for me, and that's not the only forum. I mean, everyone has a forum, but I do believe two things. You need a process and you need a community.
Community, yeah.
Without a doubt.
RJ, you just said, you knew it was going to be hard. Can you go into us how it's almost like I'm asking you, what are the basic things you go through with your clients where you actually say, I'm welcoming you on this journey. It's going to be suffering. It's going to be dark. It's going to be hard, but come and join me. This is how I'm, these are my first suggestions for motivation.
So just to be clear, I don't coach addicts. I do as a person in 12-step recovery, we do it as the 12 step. So we give back what was given to us. It's actually part of our own recovery. So I think that's the first thing. So I can't, because of my commitment to recovery 12 steps. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing for people to get into where they're charging for, but for me, I have to keep it non-monetary, because it has to be altruistic for me, because it is where I then gain more strength, where I then reinforce it for myself. And that is just the way for me. But I will answer that question. I think not only addicts, but individuals, particularly addicts, but individuals in any context in life, do not accept that things are going to be hard generally. And it's the resistance to that ultimately makes them bail. So, Celeste, that was a very good and insightful question, because whenever I meet anyone in recovery, or I speak in a recovery meeting, I don't sugarcoat it when I'm talking to new people.
Mm.
I make it very clear you're on a hero's journey. It isn't supposed to be easy, or else this room would be full of people.
Oh yeah.
Reclaiming your life and walking out of the darkness into the light isn't supposed to be easy, and nor should you want it to be easy. Because anything transformative is supposed to be challenging, it's supposed to be impactful. And I think you have to give permission to people to suffer a little bit.
Yeah, it's like that phoenix rising out, right? You have to go through the fire in,
Yeah.
in order to come out to the other side. Without getting into the fire and experiencing it, I don't think that you will come out on the other side in a light path, right? You won't see the light. You'll see just shadows, if you will, right?
And you just said the word allow. And it's almost like if you want to recover, it's almost like you're saying you need to allow yourself to go through that and allow yourself to then see the light as well. Because I think very often addicts get to a point where they close and shut down so much. They can't give out, they can't take in anymore. But it's allowing yourself
Mm,
to receive the end result and receive joy and receive love again, but allow yourself to suffer, and that it's in a safe space and that it's okay to
right.
suffer in life as well.
I
A
like
friend,
to say allow or give permission.
yeah,
Give permission.
yeah.
What,
A friend of mine, his name's Joe DeSena. He's actually from New York. He calls it purposeful suffering.
mm,
Where like it's
Mm.
suffering, it's like it's suffering in the cause of, right, or in the name of something
there's a
higher. I
reason.
mean, it's
Right.
almost a religious concept if you think about it, but
Hmm.
there's a merit to it. There's a merit to it that uh, there's hardship embraced for the benefit of.
Oh yeah. You know, RJ, and I appreciate you and the fact that you said that you don't necessarily help addicts, but in a way you do because you're sharing your story. Because you came out, you rose like that phoenix out of the fire, and you spread your wings, and because of that, you've created your ultra habits, right? Not only do you have your own podcast, but you help people thrive because of their habits, right? And I saw a video you did the other day and I loved it. You said, right before meeting, I decided that you went and worked out for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And you said the important thing is always have deodorant with you. But that's the whole thing is that you have to find those moments in time for you. And I think that's where when you come out of being an addict where you really matter, you make the difference, but you have to realize that it is you who makes the difference. You listen, you can go to 112-step programs and not take advantage of them. It's when you decide I matter, I'm the one that has to do the work. I'm the one that has to, and let's not necessarily call it suffering, but rising, right? Because you're suffering as an addict. You just don't know it.
Or I would say most do, but the predicament is it's like slavery.
Mm,
You can't do anything about it, and that's why lots of people
Controls you.
suicide.
right.
A lot of people suicide because it's ultimately slavery.
Mm,
It really is.
right.
Um, and I when I'll clarify that when I said I don't have a it's I don't have a business of helping addicts. I do it for free in
Right.
12 steps, right? So I
Right.
take people through the steps, and again, it's within the forum of 12-step recovery. It's an altruistic piece of the program, um, and the most powerful one, really.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, I heard you guys speaking at the beginning, and we all serve the master of habits. You are right. And what I came to realize working with a coach which I guess was obvious, but I didn't see it, was my greatest value she uncovered was commitment. And that made complete sense to me because I was a committed addict, and I'm a very committed person now. I mean, nothing's really changed. I just orientated it to better serving processes and habits. And so that made sense to me because I commit to processes. I'm all in. And that's how Ultra Habits was ultimately born. And a lot of that comes, the ultras obviously from ultra running, which you have to be very prepared. And when you're out there,
My
and that's
dog would love you.
do you have a cattle dog? Do you have a cattle
Yes,
dog?
I have.
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that I have a half cattle dog, half Doberman. So double
Wow.
run. She was just barking before. She's always online in the background somewhere. Yeah.
I have a greyhound, but he's old and slow now. Yeah, and he's 13 and he doesn't move, but he was a champion. We rescued him, but he was a sprinter. He wasn't a long distance runner. So we would have been at the opposite end of the spectrum, right?
You just mentioned commitment, and then we just spoke about something so joyful in having pets, but committing to another life form as well. And I've been reading a lot about Gabor Mate, who goes very into childhood neglect that then comes out in mental health illness and addictions. But he always mentions if you start looking after something again, it also helps you to commit to yourself again. So it often actually helps to get in the techniques. If it's teenagers, as an example, let them look after something else like a pet to regain the habit of healthy commitment. So that's an easier step than some other addicts would need, than get a dog. Right. But it's just it is an example where Gabor Mate, I'm a huge fan of him. He really speaks about the addiction of thinking patterns. And when you've grown up your whole goddamn life in a certain thinking way, that's already a habit. That's a thinking habit. And it's going to take a lot of new triggers and new opportunities and new visions to shift or open that thinking habit.
Right. Yeah, so that's really an interesting point, and it really touches on something. So first of all, I'll say I love Gabor Mate. I actually just finished his book on Hold On to Your Kids, around peer influence and the devastation of kind of peer influence kids today versus adult centered kids, which were kind of historically kids were raised by groups of adults, and now they're raised by their peers. And he'd written a really brilliant piece on that. But it is really because of my level of commitment, I have to be very agile and be able to hold complexity, because if I don't, I'm the kind of guy that can beat my head down one path. And so I can leverage habits in my commitment in a way that really pushes the red line. But I also have to be skillful to know when I need to pivot my approach. And that's daily. It's not extreme. It's daily. So I have to oscillate. And sometimes people, they don't really know how to cope with that, because I may work with people that might see me rev up at 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then middle of the day, I have to go for a run or have to go by myself. That's not conventional for them, but I can't operate by other people's conventions. I have to operate by what I know my true north is and how I actually access real high performance, because people have their views on what something should look like. And to your point, for people like us that are on a path, we have to ensure that we stick to our processes and our systems that work and keep us centered. So I think, Celeste, you brought home a good point. I mean, when one embraces something like commitment, one has to be skillful too. I'm not of the movement of beat yourself up to death, right? There's a lot of ultra runners, and that's really popular right now, the whole go hard or go home, grind it out. And we all go through that phase, but we have to evolve, right? We really do, and learn how to use those different gears as required, when required, skillfully.
Yeah. You know, when we think about, and I love the fact how you talked about that you basically are beating your own drum. You're not going with what everyone else is doing because it doesn't work for you. And that's where your ultra habit has come through, because it is a habit, right? Because a trigger can maybe make an addict go back to becoming to
Smallest trigger too.
to go back to those things that they had, that had them in that terrible place, if you will, right? So it's the triggers, it's the habits, it's the replacement of, right, in order to sustain your your new life, if you will, right?
New
Because
habits.
you are reborn, right? Once you go to the other side of being addicted.
Yeah, yeah, quite right. And it's not always easy, particularly, I'm in business. I'm in kind of stressful situations where you're there's people elements, people dynamics, power,
Mhm.
positional power, and I can go back to RJ, the drug dealer, very easily,
Mhm.
very easily. I can go back to old ways of being and operating where I'm operating in fight, but the environment's changed.
Right.
It's no longer relevant to the context I'm operating in, but I see a stick and I think I'm seeing a snake because
Mm.
my perception is
Right.
skewed by my history and past. And that's deep spiritual work. That's the unwinding we were talking about with you, Celeste, and how in psychology has answers for that. Eastern practices, in my view, probably have better answers for it. Um,
Agree.
but that's the interesting stuff, is when those triggers come up. How do I be? How do I see?
Mm. And how do I react to them? Because triggers are always going to come, and
Mhm.
that's the hardest for a recovered addict, is to really learn with the fact that every single day, no matter how good or bad your environment is going to be, or the people you try to surround yourself with, that trigger is going to come. It can be something so little. So, and I often think it's hard because once you are aware of one trigger and you've written it on the whiteboard and you go, okay, I've got this one under control. It's almost like the next one would come. So that must be a huge process to learn how to deal with the triggers, not only what they are, because I believe they would constantly change. Is that correct?
They do, and if I can bring it to a business context, I work in businesses. Um, I The business requires of me certain ways of being that, what may be going through my head, my mind, my body is old behaviors and old ways of thinking. But on a
Mhm.
daily basis, I'm required to be one of the most stable people in the room.
Mm.
And in some ways, you know, the existential pressure of the environment and having to be an adult, it drives your behavior to conform. But many times I come home and I'm exhausted because all those triggers and all the things have been playing out, and I've been holding it and sitting with it and
Mm.
being with it, not reacting to it. In many ways, it's just easier to react
Mm.
sometimes.
Oh,
Then
yeah.
you have to deal with the fallout.
Right.
But
Mm.
what I'm, do you,
Exactly.
if you got, do you guys understand what I'm trying to say?
Oh,
So
without a doubt. Absolutely. You're putting all that energy into it that is going to exhaust you, right? All these different things that you're fighting off, or in order to be the adult in the room, like you said, be the smartest guy in the room, you need to constantly be energized, and then you come home, you're exhausted. But RJ, I love the fact that, and you shared with me, and I follow you, obviously, that you have a purpose, right? And your purpose is not only to stay sober, to be a person who helps other people become more than they've ever been with your ultra habits, but then you also have your purpose of your family. You have a beautiful family. And when we think of that, that is your driving force. And that's why you need to do what you do. And sometimes, yes, it's going to be exhausting, right? But
Hmm.
you do it because there's a why. That's your why. Am I right?
Yeah, I yes, I my primary purpose, and this was initially just to survive
Mm,
through getting sober, is to, I guess, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to self-actualize, right? And I don't mean that there's a continual striving, but I am very interested and in love with evolving,
mm,
which initially started off as a need, like I had to. The world had extremely sharp edges for me when I got sober. I felt everything.
mm,
And not only did it, oh, but not only that, Celeste, and I now know what it is. I remember being in Bondi. I lived in Bondi, and I was walking through a shopping center, and I was maybe a year
That's a lot of
sober.
sensory overload at Bondi, no
Yeah,
matter if you clear
you're
thinking
right.
or
Yeah,
not.
you're right. You're right. I was in Bondi. You're quite right, and that's probably was part of it. But I remember walking through Bondi, and I had this intense feeling of separation.
mm,
It was just gut wrenching, where I felt like I couldn't plug in to the world that was around me. And that's when I immediately realized that's why I drank and used.
mm.
I just, it was incredible. Yes, Celeste?
No, that goes back to the people that either use the drugs or the substance to either more sedate their mind because it's too much sensory overload. It's an escape, or
Mhm.
it's the opposite. It's almost like I want more. I want to feel more. I want to see more. I want to, so the enhancing part of it. And from the studies I've done, I find it interesting when you speak to adults that are an addict, if it was mental health based. And where I'm going with this is, if you in your childhood, let's say, were undetected as being on the spectrum or even slightly ADHD, it means you had that sensory overload your whole life, never were taught how to deal with it. You
Mm,
managed to get to become an adult, but it's just too much. So often it's very sad that adults become into the extreme addiction because there's also an undetected, let's say, mental health or a mental,
Issue, yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
imbalance that could have been looked after at earlier age. And that's why, again, never judge someone. There's so many different reasons why someone was an addict or is an addict.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
sensory overload is huge, I believe.
And it's interesting as I've gotten older, I was a alcoholic, but addicted to uppers.
Mm.
And until speed and things like that stopped working because of my nervous system started to kind of, it got shot. Like my nervous system at 26 was done.
Mm,
I used to drink all day, do speed, smoke weed, and I would be a nervous wreck by midnight, and you could find me in the 24-hour gym, sweating it all out in my jeans in a sauna where I could have had a heart attack in a steam room. Right, I'm sitting in
mm.
there, I just want it out of my
Gosh.
body. I get out of the steam room and I'm sober, and I go and do it again.
Poof.
right? And that was my life. And I'd be working out day in, day out without sleeping. Like it was just a concoction of madness.
Right.
Um, and you know, you get sober and you realize you've been living in a panic attack
Mm.
for years, and now you've got to deal with that sober, and that takes a long time to unwind. As a
Burst
person,
adrenal glands, yeah.
and and now at 40, 41 last month, I'm a
Congratulations.
thanks, brother. Y- yeah,
You made it.
things, I did
Now.
make it. I did. I'm getting old. And yeah, and things even evolve now. Like I trail run. I live in the mountains. um, I get probably a lot of those endorphins from running the distances, pushing my body like I do. I have to,
Mm,
slowing down when I need to, taking care of my body when I need to. But I would much rather at this stage in my life be with less people, have less kind of sensory input. And I think
mm,
that's just a function of age.
right.
So, that does shift as well. Like, well, my needs, my response to stimuli as I age, as I stay sober longer. And I'm sure it will continue to evolve as it does for everyone.
Mhm. So let me ask you a question. How has your sensory changed since you became sober?
Well, when I first got sober, I had a lot of physical sensitivity to food, which was interesting. For 2, 3 years, I would
Mm,
get, my whole gut and my whole body was out of whack. I couldn't eat things without getting bloated. My sleep was out of whack. So I had a lot of physical discomfort, but I also was young and started to work out
mm,
a lot. Um, I think a lot of the fire in the belly has started to kind of reduce, and I think that's partly with age. Um, the feeling of panic attacks, the 5 years into recovery, I was doing an MBA in a very difficult program. I was building a business. I was doing everything in my life was scheduled, like
mhm,
literally on a calendar.
right.
And you talk about like how habits weren't serving me. That's an example, right? Like everything was planned, and I had a meltdown 5 years sober where I was
Mm,
just exhausted. I was exhausted from my narrative, the physical exhaustion, and I had
mhm,
to go deeper into sobriety through meditation. I had to learn to start to sit with
yeah,
myself.
yeah,
Um, and then I had the kids, and that went, the meditation went, all that went out the window. I've got a 2-year-old, I've got a 5-year-old, and
mm,
you know, had I had this when I got sober, I would not know how to manage any of it. So things have changed in terms of managing how I respond to stimuli and input from my environment. I would say that I've become recently interested in polyvagal theory. Like I'm really interested in my nervous system. Like I
mhm,
want to start to unpack more about how I can start to feel calmer and just more in my body and less flight or flight, because that's something that's never really completely subsided to the extent that I would like. I
mhm,
still get fight or flight and any, you know, myriad of anxiety to, um, cortisol, whatever. Like I still, it's not always in the right context,
mhm,
so I know there's still stuff going on there, um, in my body that I want to continue to learn and unpack.
yeah, without a doubt. I really want to, thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining us today and sharing your story. But, on a lighter aspect, you're a phenomenal business person, and we'd love to have you again at a different time to talk about a different subject, of course.
But not so intense, maybe. I mean, I'm an intense person. I'm sure you guys are too. So we can go
This
real.
is RJ. This is why I love you, man, because of the intensity. Why do you think Celeste and I get along so well? Because of our intensity, right?
We only started the show because we love talking about all these things, and we just want to talk all the time. That's why we said we might as well have a show and make a purpose out of it.
You guys are very, very good hosts, and Rafael, obviously we've spoken to before, but I was watching you. Sorry, I was like sure there was a link. Like I use StreamYard. I'm like, where's the link? Like, and anyways, I was off the ball, but I was just watching the way you guys were handling the show and the depth and how you guys opened the show. I love that the syringe, and it's a really well done discussion. I would say, that one. Yeah, it's a really well done.
I had this one as well that I wanted to talk about the emotional sides of it, but obviously the subject is endless.
So we definitely, you know, on a lighter note, anybody who even knows an addict and is like at their wits' end, how do I help someone? I think for me, the you can do all you can. Listen, one of my brothers was an addict forever, and in and out of jail, in and out of hospitals, all different kinds of things. But when we think about how can we help someone, I think it has to finally come down to, can we really put a mirror to them?
Yeah.
Because that's where the real help is going to come in. We can do all we want, but until they're ready, it's not going to help, right?
No. I think, and we need to be very careful how we say this, because I really, out of my experience, people can get very hurt themselves if they try, because you are never going to be the change. It's the person.
Mm-hmm.
So don't get lost into that. You can only show them doors and show them love.
That's it. Lots of love.
Yeah, it's kind of love with detachment, right? Like you're, and that was brilliant, Rafael. Like you're 100% right. Like it's the continually shining a light and holding a mirror, because ultimately that individual needs to see themselves as they really are as much as they can, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to make the shift and the change. And I think not enabling them, which is hard as a family member, because you kind of want to keep them physically close, out of trouble. And addicts, when we're in addiction, are very, very convincing, because we are desperate. And it is, I don't believe in, the devil or any of that, but if there was, it would take the form in addiction, because it has a way to speak to the person that's addicted and to others in a way where everyone gets confused and loses touch with reality. It's phenomenal.
So an addict will go at all measures and means in order to get that fix, right? Whatever the fix is. It could be sex, it could be food. It does not matter. I've helped people with food addictions. It does not matter. And like you're right. They will lie. They will convince. They will do whatever it takes in order to facilitate that need, that desire. And it doesn't matter the cost. And a lot of times it's a cost to them.
Always, really.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah. And sometimes it's costing the family, the people who are the closest. The ones that try to help the most are the ones that suffer as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you guys believe in? Like here in Australia, we really have, and for all the listeners here in Australia, if you are a severe addict, you can go to any suburbs and there are free communities where you sit together, anonymous. You don't even have to mention your name if you don't want to, but you can speak in a safe space around. And I just wanted to share one slide, because here in Australia, honestly, I've done my research. We have hotlines 24/7. We have over 3,000 phone calls a day just on that subject of reaching out, what the first step is. And I do really also believe that you can literally go into Google and go into near me. When you look up a shop or you look up a community near me, and there is a community there for you. And that's sometimes the first step. If you don't want to tell your friends, if you don't want to tell your family, because you barely have the strength to tell it yourself,
Hmm.
then that's the first step, allowing yourself to accept it. So I personally believe sitting down in those groups, which are for free, no excuse, that's a very good step too.
Right.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, RJ, where in the world are you?
Yeah, where are you now if you're not at Bondi?
I live in Melbourne these days, so I was in New South Wales, and moved to Melbourne in August. Not loving the cold. I'm not a fan of the cold, but
Mm.
I live in uh, a place called the Dandenong Ranges, which is a mountain range. It's
Mm.
quite beautiful up here,
It's
and
very beautiful. Yeah. It's almost, you don't have snow, but you almost have four seasons. Considering Australia's so tropical and hot, like I'm in Byron Bay at the moment, it's beautiful weather, very spiritual environment. And but where you're from, you almost, it's not snow, but it's freezing cold, isn't it? You almost have the four
yeah.
seasons.
My wife is from Byron. She grew up there, and my mother-in-law just came down from a place called Clunes, which is
Mhm.
northern New South Wales, close to Lismore. And she was
Yes.
like, "I got to get out of here." She was like,
Mm.
we told her, I said, If you come down here," because when we tell her it's cold, she has her like northern New South Wales hat on. So
Yeah.
that part of the world is my favorite part of the world, and we'll probably end up there, but maybe more like Bellingen or a bit more south. But yeah, it's I
We
have to
need
be in
to
the mountains.
invite Rafael from New York. Invite everyone to.
Yeah,
I'm coming one day. You
you got to
guys
get
just,
over here, bro.
I will definitely. In the U.S. and I'm sure everywhere in the world, they do have a 12-step system, and when we think about a system, and you talked about it, RJ, we have to follow a system because the system that we're using is not working. Right? If you're
Mhm.
an addict, your system does not work. Let's go and that's why I believe in coaching so much. Let's go find someone who's done it, who's been through it. Like RJ, you've been through it. You help people. You go and you have, these talks and so forth, and you're there to help people. And I love the fact that you talk about being ultra, not only with your habits, but with your help, right? You're there and you do it for free because that's you're being a human being, my friend.
You're
Thank you
being a
for
hero.
yeah,
It's just it's part of our process. So if no one, in particularly in 12-step recovery, if no one gave it away, um, you got to give it away to keep it, as we say.
that's right.
And so, um, I have many of friends that have been addicts that went into the business of recovery. Some of them have done well, some of them relapsed.
Mm,
Because particularly, I think for an addict, um, there has to be some level of self-sacrifice, and there has to be some level of inconvenience,
of course.
and there's got to be a level of altruism there, in my experience.
Well, I
Yeah.
Um,
find that really interesting. That should be a whole subject for itself. For
Yeah.
those who teach something out of experience, that should be a really good thing. But does that then also release the triggers again?
Mm,
that's true.
yeah.
Because usually I always vouch for someone who can teach something out of experience. Because sometimes, even as we said before, just before, because you did 8 years doctor and another 8 years psychology and maybe another 4 years of child psychology, and you've done 16 years of sitting in a classroom, but then you come into the real world, the classroom didn't teach you that. So
Mm,
I usually always vouch for people. I always ask, what is your experience,
yeah.
It's a very good question. Yeah.
There is that difference between book smart and street smart, right?
I'm definitely more street smart.
Yeah, and I think it's being skillful in that you're building on both.
Mm.
They call street smarts today EQ, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's just you kind of can connect. And I mean, I have people that I've worked with, tremendous talent and
Mm.
just off the wall with their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And like, but the talent, Celeste, you talked about it earlier, the creative talent. I'm the type of person, if you work with me or for me, I will bear the brunt of your mental um, and psychological chaos for your performance and creativity. Well, why can I bear the brunt of that? Because I see you, I know you,
Mm.
I am you.
Yeah.
And I, if all people should be able to empathize. And when I can't, I need to quickly pull myself up. And so I love being around people that have those struggles sometimes, because they are the people that also have the output and the creativity. But
Mm-hmm.
there's always a dark side. There generally is a dark side, and I'm willing to be there for that, and that's partly because of my own experience.
Right.
I can't point the finger at anyone.
Mm.
No, no.
I can't.
I don't
One
think
of the
any of us three can.
one of the things is that even if you don't see the signs at first of someone becoming an addict, right? There's always that struggle between the dark and the light side, if you will, right? There's always every day for many people. There's that struggle, the stress, the pressure. You have to provide. You have to be a provider. You have to go to work. You have to be a good student, a good son, a good husband, good wife, whatever it is. So it's dealing with the struggles that we face every day that can easily drive someone to drink, to use drugs, to smoke even. You look at someone and the steps that everyone can slowly start to take to become addicted. And sometimes they're minor steps, as maybe just picking up a cigarette, and then all of a sudden it's this other little thing, and maybe just I'm just going to go for one beer after work, and then all of a sudden it's like it's every Friday. Oh, I might as well do it on Saturday too. It's the weekend. Woohoo, it's party time. But when we think about those little steps lead to bigger steps and bigger steps and bigger steps. And eventually you're inundated because you have steps that we can take for success, but you can also have steps that you can take for failure, right?
Yeah.
It's just not
Yeah.
overindulging, really,
Yeah.
with everything in life, right? Just a little bit of everything. No overindulging, because overindulging will then also increase our intolerance for
Mhm.
something, for a behavior or a feeling or a substance for a feeling.
Yeah.
And the acceptable and the unacceptable becomes acceptable
Exactly.
as you
RJ,
start to.
thank you
Mm.
so
You're
much.
welcome. Thanks for
Amazing,
having me.
amazing stuff. Celeste, as always, from New York, coming to you, and Celeste from Queensland. And now we have a great new friend who will join us again another time. And we'll talk about so many different subjects we can discuss, because not only we can talk about business, but we can talk about even how to create a habit. But RJ will talk about creating those ultra habits, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have an amazing and blessed rest of your day in New York or evening where you guys are at. Right?
Evening for us here in Australia. It was lovely. Bye for
Thanks,
now.
guys.
Bye bye.
Bye.